entry into that heavenly kingdom had been held out as a prospect for Jesus' faithful disciples, but on the basis of their having stuck with him in his trials, something o textui acute miritra longo. Paradise 576 was regarded by some as on earth itself, by others as forming part of Sheol, by others still as neither on earth nor under earth, but in heaven. But there is some doubt as respects, at least, part of this. These various conceptions are found indeed in later Judaism. They appear most precisely and most in detail in the medieval Kabbalistic Judaism. But it is uncertain how far back these things can be carried. The older Jewish theology at least seems to give little or no place to the idea of an intermediate paradise. It speaks of a Gehinnom for the wicked, and a Gan Eden, or Garden of Eden, for the just. It is questionable whether it goes beyond these conceptions and affirms a paradise in Sheol. 1905, Volume 3, pages 669, 670. Even if they did teach such a thing, it would be most unreasonable to believe that Jesus would propagate such a concept, in view of his condemnation of the non-biblical religious traditions of the Jewish religious leaders. Mount 15. 3-9 Likely the paradise truly familiar to the Jewish malefactor to whom Jesus spoke was the earthly paradise described in the first book of the Hebrew Scriptures, the paradise of Eden. That being so, Jesus' promise would reasonably point to a restoration of such earthly paradisaic condition. His promise to the wrongdoer would therefore give assured hope of a resurrection of such an unrighteous one to an opportunity to life in that restored paradise. Compare Act 24. 15. Re 20. 12, 13. 21. 1-5. Mount 6. 10. A spiritual paradise. Throughout many of the prophetic books of the Bible, divine promises are found regarding the restoration of Israel from the lands of its exile to its desolated homeland. God would cause that abandoned land to be tilled and sown, to produce richly, and to abound with humankind and animalkind. The cities would be rebuilt and inhabited, and people would say, "That land yonder which was laid desolate has become like the Garden of Eden." S 36. 6-11, 29, 30, 33-35. Compare Isa 51. 3. J 31. 10-12. S 34. 25-27. However, these prophecies also show that paradise conditions related to the people themselves, who, by faithfulness to God, could now sprout and flourish as trees of righteousness, enjoying beautiful spiritual prosperity like a well-watered garden, showered by bounteous blessings from God because of having his favor. Isra 58. 11. 61. 3, 11. J 31. 12. 32. 41. Compare PS 1. 3. 72. 3, 6-8, 16. 85. 10-13. Isra 44. 3, 4. The people of Israel had been God's vineyard, his planting, but their badness and apostasy from true worship had caused a figurative withering away of their spiritual field, even before the literal desolation of their land took place. Compare X 15. 17. Isa 5. 1-8. J 2. 21. It is evident, however, that the restoration prophecies recorded by the Hebrew prophets include elements that will also find a physical fulfillment in the restored earthly paradise. There are features, for example, in Isaiah 35. 1-7, such as the healing of the blind and the lame, that did not have a literal fulfillment following the restoration from ancient Babylon, nor are they fulfilled in such a manner in the Christian spiritual paradise. It would be inconsistent for God to inspire such prophecies as those of Isaiah 11. 6-9, Ezekiel 34. 25, and Hosea 2. 18, with the intention that they have only a figurative or spiritual meaning, without having a literal fulfillment of these things in the physical experiences of God's servants. The paradise that Paul mentioned at 2 Corinthians 12. 4 could also refer to the future paradise, both physical and spiritual, of these Hebrew prophecies, as well as possibly being a vision of the paradise of God, the blessed condition in heaven. Re 2. 7. Eating in the paradise of God. Revelation 2. 7 mentions a tree of life in the paradise of God, and that eating from it would be the privilege of the one that conquers. Since other promises given o texto e acute miritra longo, parchment 577 damage or disorder of the nervous system, or from atrophy of muscles, thus either preventing the transmission of nerve impulses, or rendering the muscles unable to react to them. Paralysis has many names and forms, some of which types can be fatal. Among its causes are diseases in the case of diphtheritic paralyses, brain lesions, damage to the spinal cord, or pressure from a tumor. Paralyzed persons were among those miraculously cured by Jesus Christ. Mount 4. 24 A paralyzed man was brought to Jesus, who cured the sufferer after forgiving his sins. Then, at Christ's bidding, the former paralytic picked up his cot and went home. Mount 9. 2-8. Mr. 2. 3-12. U5. 18-26 On another occasion the manservant of an army officer was laid up with paralysis and was about to die, but Jesus healed him from a distance. Mount 8. 5-13. Lu 7. 1-10 This slave was terribly tormented, or terribly afflicted. Mount 8. 6, which may, but does not necessarily, indicate that he was suffering intense pain. Though usually not painful, paralysis may be. Cramp-like pains occur in the spine and the extremities in cases of paralysis agitans Parkinsonism, or shaking palsy, and there is agonizing pain in paraplegia dolorosa, a form of paralysis associated with some cases of spinal cord cancer. Paralytics are persons afflicted with paralysis. The evangelist Philip preached, and he performed signs in the city of Samaria, curing many paralyzed persons. Act 8. 5-8 In Lydda, paralyzed Aeneas, who has been lying flat on his cot for 8 years, was told by Peter, Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Rise and make up your bed. At that, he rose immediately. Act 9. 32-35. Paran. The greater part of that vast wilderness region in which the nation of Israel wandered about for some 38 years before entering the Promised Land. New 10. 11, 12. The 2. 14 Having no fixed boundaries, Paran occupied the central and northeastern portion of the Sinai Peninsula. On the E was that part of the Rift Valley known as the Araba and also the Gulf of the Kaaba, on the S the wilderness of Sinai, on this the wilderness of Sin, and on the NW and N the wildernesses of Etham and Shur. Toward the Dead Sea to the NE, Paran blended with, and perhaps included, the wilderness of Zin and perhaps even reached up to Beersheba near the mountains of Judah. 1-25. 1, 2. For the most part Paran was a rough mountainous region of limestone, platonic in places, the central section being between 600 and 750 meters, 2,000 to 2,500 feet high. 33. 2. Compare Hab 3. 3. It was also included as part of that great and fear-inspiring wilderness referred to in Deuteronomy 1. 19. 8. 15. Except during the brief rainy seasons, the gravel face of this rude country is devoid of green vegetation. Springs are few and far between. These factors emphasize how completely the nation of Israel, numbering perhaps 3 million persons, was dependent upon Jehovah for his miraculous provision of food and water during the many years they wandered in the wilderness. Acts 16. 1, 4, 12-15, 35. 2. 7. 8. 15, 16. Apparently the first reference to this wilderness of Paran was in the days of Lot, when Chedorlaomer and his allies defeated a number of cities in the vicinities of the Dead Sea and Edom as far as El Paran. GE 14. 4-6 Later, after Ishmael was dismissed by his father Abraham, he settled down in the wilderness of Paran and occupied himself mainly with the hunt. GE 21. 21. However, the principal references to Paran are in connection with the wanderings of the Israelites. After leaving Mount Sinai, Israel camped at Taberah and Kibroth Hattaavah, then at Hatzeroth on the southern edge of Paran, before moving in toward Kadesh Barnea. New 10. 12, 33. 11. 3, 34, 35. 12. 16. Not long after entering Paran, the 12 spies were sent out to investigate Canaan. New 13. 3, 26. The bad report given by the majority upon their return resulted in Jehovah's decree that the otextoi acute miritra longo, pardon 578, when the ruler of Egypt prohibited the exporting of it. About 190 BCE the use of leather parchment was invented in Pergamum. The English word parchment comes from Lat. Pergamena. Perhaps this means simply the popularizing of an already existing method of treating the skin so that both sides could be written on. Scrolls of parchment were much more durable than the less expensive papyrus scrolls. At 2 Timothy 4. 13 the Apostle Paul asked Timothy to bring the scrolls, especially the parchments. In W. Row he does not indicate the contents of these requested items, but quite possibly he was asking for portions of the Hebrew scriptures so that he could study them while imprisoned in Rome. The phrase especially the parchments may indicate that both scrolls of papyrus and scrolls of parchment were involved. Among the early Romans, wooden tablets covered with wax were often used for writing matters of a temporary nature. Eventually sheets of leather or parchment were used instead for this purpose. The Latin word membraniscens was applied to such notebooks of parchment. In the text quoted earlier, Paul employed a Greek equivalent of the word in asking for the scrolls, especially the parchments branas. Thus some commentators have suggested that he was requesting scrolls of the Hebrew scriptures plus notes or letters of some type. So Moffat translates it, my books, and particularly my papers, and the New English Bible reads, the books, above all my notebooks. However, whether the parchments were in the form of notebooks or papers, or were parchment scrolls kx cannot be ascertained. Vellum. Parchments were normally made from sheep, goat, or calf skin. In the 3rd and 4th centuries CE there arose a distinction between the coarser and the finer grades of the material, the coarser continuing to be called parchment, but the finer, vellum. The vellum was made from delicate skins of calf veal or kid, or of stillborn calves or lambs. It was prepared by scraping the hair from the washed skins, stretching them on a frame, washing and scraping again to remove inequalities, dusting with chalk, and rubbing with pumice. This produced a thin, smooth, almost white writing material that came to be widely used for important books until the invention of printing, for which paper was better and cheaper. Important Bible manuscripts such as the 4th century Sinaitic and Vatican No. 1209 as well as the 5th century Alexandrine manuscripts are of vellum. Pardon. The Hebrew word narmiddledotsa, sometimes translated pardon, is also used in the scriptures in the sense of race, lift up GE 45. 19. X6. 8. 2 Chi 2. 16. Take GE 27. 3. Take away New 16. 15. A basic meaning of the word, however, is bear, carry. GE 47. 30. 1 Chi 2. 26. S 44. 12. 13 There is still an allusion to this in instances where narmiddledotsa is appropriately translated pardon. The scriptures speak of the goat for Azazel as carrying away sin, and it was foretold that the Messiah would bear the error of the people. The 16. 8, 10, 22. Is for 53. 12 By reason of his carrying, or bearing, the error of others, pardon is made possible for them. See Azazel. Whereas the word narmiddledotsa may denote the pardon, or forgiveness, extended by God or by humans GE 18. 24, 26. 50. 17. Middle.lack is used exclusively of God's forgiveness, the act by which the sinner is restored to divine favor in answer to his sincere prayer for forgiveness or to another's intercessory prayer. New 14. 19, 20. 1 Chi 8. 30. When the Hebrew narmiddledotsa has the sense of pardon, or forgiveness, the Greek Septuagint at times uses the word middle.miles in its basic sense. A denotes let go of. This term can signify forgive, pardon. At Romans 4. 7. The Apostle Paul quoted from Psalm 32. 1:31. 1. LXX, where the reference is to Jehovah's pardoning revolt, and he used a form of the word me, as does the Greek Septuagint o textoi acute miritra longo, Partridge 579. Among his great works, Solomon made both gardens and parks orchards, KJ. Heb. Farm in which he planted fruit trees of all sorts. EC2. 5. He uses the same term in his superlative song when he as the shepherd lover described the Shulamite maiden's skin as a paradise of pomegranates, with the choicest fruits. Kra 1. 1. 4. 12, 13 in post-exilic times, Nehemiah 2. 7, 8 shows that the Persian king had placed Asaph as the keeper of the park that belongs to the king, and that application had to be made for permission to fell trees from this park for the reconstruction work in Jerusalem. See forest. Garden. Mashtar from Persian, possibly meaning the very first. One of Haman's 10 sons. As 9. 9. Parmenas. One of the 7 recommended to the apostles and appointed by them to ensure a just daily distribution of food supplies in the Jerusalem congregation after Pentecost of 33 CE Acts 6. 1-6. Parnak. A Zebulonite whose son Elizaphan was the tribal representative in dividing the promised land. New 34. 17, 18, 25. Parosh Flee. Founder of a family in Israel. There were 2,172 of his descendants who returned to Jerusalem with Zerubbabel in 537 BCE as 2. 1-3. Ne7. 8 by the time that Ezra arrived in 468 BCE with 150 sons of Parosh led by Zechariah, some of their family already in Jerusalem had taken foreign wives, whom they later sent away. Ezra 8. 1, 3. 10. 25, 44 Pedaiah, one of the family, repaired a section of Jerusalem's wall. Ne 3. 25 The head of the Parosh family attested to the later covenant agreeing to keep the law of Jehovah. Ne 9. 38. 10. 1, 14. Pashentapar Shan Dartha from Persian, possibly meaning the investigator. One of Haman's 10 sons. As 9. 7. Parsin. One of the words mysteriously written on the wall of Belshazzar's palace and read and interpreted by Daniel. Dar 5. 25 It is the plural number of Perez, which means a half shekel, a division of a shekel. In giving the interpretation, Daniel did not use the plural parsin, but used the singular form Perez. Dar 5. 28 Perhaps this was because only Belshazzar was present to hear the prophet explain the prophetic message, although it applied to both rulers of the Babylonian Empire, Belshazzar and Nabonidus. See Perez. Parthians Parthia belonging to Parthia. Jews and proselytes from Parthia are listed first among those visitors attending the festival of Pentecost, 33 CE in Jerusalem. God's Holy Spirit poured out on the group of about 120 Christian disciples, enabled them to proclaim the good news in the language or dialect of those Parthians, some of whom doubtless responded favorably, became Christians, and likely spread the message among their own people upon returning to Parthia. Act 1. 15. 2. 1, 4-12, 37-47 The natural Jews from Parthia were part of the dispersion. The proselytes Act 2. 10 were non-Jews who had become converts to Judaism. The Parthian Empire originated of the Caspian Sea, but in time came to extend from the Euphrates as far as India. The Parthians were subject to the Persians from the time of King Cyrus. Later coming under Greek domination, they rebelled against the successors of Alexander the Great and managed to maintain their independence for several centuries, even against Rome. They held Judea for several years before losing it to the Romans. The Parthians were still an independent nation in the 1st century, and though they practiced the predominant Persian religion, the religions of the Jews and others were tolerated. Partridge Heb. Co-middle. A chicken-like gallinaceous bird, stout-bodied, smaller than the pheasant, able to run and dodge with great swiftness, seldom resorting to flight and tiring quickly when it does. Two kinds of partridges found in Palestine are the sand partridge Amopatix and the rock partridge Electris Grecolotextoia acute Muritra longo, Peru 580 a partridge upon the mountains. 1 Sir 26. 20. Compare 3. 52. The text at Jeremiah 17. 11, likening the man unjustly amassing wealth to the partridge that has gathered together or, possibly, hatched what it has not laid, has been the subject of much discussion. Whereas certain ancient writers described the partridge as taking eggs from other hens' nests and incubating them, present-day naturalists state that none of the birds classified as partridges have such a practice. However, Lexicon in Veteris Testamenti Labros refers to Jewish zoologist Israel Aharoni 1882–1946, a writer of works on Palestinian animal life, as having found 2 layings of 11 eggs each of 2 different females partridges in the same nest. By L. Cooler and W. Baumgartner, Leiden, 1958, p. 851. Thus, the Encyclopaedia Judaica 1973, Volume 13, Col. 156 states. Sometimes 2 females lay eggs in the same nest, in which case one gains the upper hand and drives the other away. However, her small body is unable to keep such a large number of eggs warm, so that eventually the embryos die. It was to this that the proverb in Jeremiah 17. 11 referred when speaking of one who robs another of his possessions without ultimately deriving any benefit. Jeremiah 17. 11 in the King James Version reads, As the partridge sitteth on eggs, and hatcheth them not, so he that getteth riches, and not by right, shall leave them in the midst of his days, and at his end shall be a fool. In support of this alternative interpretation, John Sawyer reasons that the point is the proverbial vulnerability of the partridge's nest, exposed as it is to marauding predators of many kinds, compared to the vulnerability of the fool who puts his trust in base gain. He goes on to say that the effectiveness of the proverb in Jeremiah 17. 11 does not depend on the treachery of the brooding partridge, but on its vulnerability, compared to the false sense of security of the fool who thinks he can get away with his criminal acquisitiveness. Unaware of the dangers hanging over him and defenseless when disaster strikes. Vetus Testamentum, Leiden, 1978, pages 324, 328, 329. Peru Parmiddle.Ruah. Father of the Jehoshaphat who served as Solomon's food deputy in the territory of Issachar. 1 Kai 4. 7, 17. Parsach. Family head in the tribe of Asher. Son of Japhlet. 1 Ch 7. 30, 33, 40. Pasdamim. Evidently another name for Ephisdamim, a place between Soko and Azekah. 1 Ch 17. 1 Ch 11. 13. Parmiddle.Salaim. 1. The descendant of Judah in the line of Chub the brother of Shuah. 1 Ch 4. 1, 11, 12. 2. Forefather of a family of Nethinim, some of whom returned from the Babylonian exile with Zerubbabel in 537 BCE as 2. 1, 2, 43, 49. Ne 7. 51. 3. Father of the Joiada who helped repair the gate of the old city in the wall of Jerusalem 455 BCE. Ne 3. 6. Pashur. 1. Father of Gedaliah who was one of the princes of Judah responsible for having Jeremiah thrown into a cistern. 38. 1, 4, 6.